Man purchased a 50-cent stone mansion, his dog's howl revealed a secret. Buried for decades. The snow came sideways across the 2-lane road, the kind that erased tire tracks as soon as they were made. Evan Cole leaned forward over the wheel of his rusted Ford, the wipers slapping rhythm against the silence. The dashboard clock blinked 2:17 p.m., though the sky looked closer to midnight. When he turned onto the gravel drive, the world narrowed to a tunnel of white and pine. The stone mansion appeared slowly out of the storm, a hulking grey silhouette crouched at the edge of the woods. Its windows were dark, half-shuttered, its roof dusted with ice. The sign at the gate still read, Briggs Estate in letters eaten by rust. 50 cents. That was what he'd paid for it at the county auction 2 weeks ago. 50 cents for a place everyone in Haven Rock whispered about, but no one dared to buy. Axel sat rigid in the passenger seat, the German shepherd's breath fogging the window. When Evan cut the engine, the sudden silence pressed on his chest. The only sound was the slow click of the cooling engine and the soft whine from Axel's throat. "You're not spooked, are you?" Evan asked quietly. Axel didn't move. His amber eyes stayed fixed on the porch ahead. Then, as Evan reached for the door handle, the dog's ears flicked back, his body lowering. He let out a low growl that rolled deep in his chest, then lifted his muzzle and howled. It wasn't frantic. It was mournful, steady, the kind of sound that carried farther than reason. It echoed through the trees, bounced off the empty hills, and came back softer, like an answer. Evan froze halfway out of the truck. "Axel, enough!" The dog fell silent but didn't relax. Evan stepped into the cold. The air bit hard, slicing through his jacket, filling his lungs with something raw and metallic. The snow under his boots crunched like glass. He followed the old driveway toward the porch, passing a stone bird bath frozen solid. Every sound felt louder than it should have. The front door was larger than he expected. Oak panels faded to grey, iron hinges hand-forged, too fine for a house left to rot. The county clerk had warned him that the place was sealed since the Briggs family bankruptcy. "You'll find dust and maybe raccoons," she'd said. Nothing else. But when Evan pressed the key into the lock, it turned too easily. The door swung open without a creak, as though someone had oiled it yesterday. The smell hit first. Not decay, not mildew, something faintly sweet and sharp, like cedar and stale coffee. Inside, the air hung still, thick with the weight of time. Axel didn't follow. He stood on the threshold, muscles taut, head tilted, nostrils twitching. His front paw lifted, suspended mid-air. Evan had seen that posture before, years ago on a search mission in Colorado, when Axel had scented trapped gas under the rubble. The dog never froze for no reason. "Come on, boy." Axel let out a quiet huff, but stayed where he was. Evan sighed, stepped inside, and turned in a slow circle. The foyer opened wide, with a grand staircase curving upward into shadows. Dust lay across the marble floor, but there were footprints already there, fresh, small, and leading away from the stairs toward the kitchen. His pulse tightened. He glanced back at Axel. The dog's tail had dropped, eyes locked on the same prints. Evan knelt, ran a gloved hand over one of the marks. The edges were crisp, the tread from a modern boot, not old leather. He followed the line to the hallway until they disappeared on the worn rug. A faint click sounded behind him. He spun. The front door had swung shut on its own. The latch caught with a heavy thunk. Axel barked once, sharp, commanding. Evan crossed back fast and tried the handle. It didn't move. Frozen? No, jammed. He turned again. The house seemed to hum with a low vibration, a noise he couldn't place. "Anyone here?" His voice came out rougher than he meant. Only silence answered. Then, faintly, a dripping sound from somewhere upstairs. Axel's growl deepened, low and continuous. He stepped into the foyer at last, moving slow, nose close to the floor. He sniffed, paused near the staircase, then looked up, ears forward. Evan followed his gaze. Something shifted on the landing. Small, quick, gone. A shadow behind the banister, or maybe his eyes playing tricks. He drew in a breath, steadying himself. "You see that too, boy?" Axel gave a single short bark, then began climbing. Each step creaked under his weight. Evan followed, flashlight drawn from his jacket pocket, beam cutting through dust motes that shimmered in the cold light. The upstairs hallway was narrow, lined with closed doors, wallpaper peeled in long strips. Halfway down, Axel stopped and sniffed the air. His fur bristled. "What is it?" Evan whispered. The shepherd turned to face the last door on the left and whined softly. Evan reached for the knob. It turned without resistance. The room smelled faintly of oil and old paper. A desk sat by the window, a single chair pushed neatly beneath it. On the desktop lay a tin mug, half full of water frozen into cloudy ice. Someone had been here recently. Axel let out another low sound, half growl, half warning. Then he stepped toward the far wall and began pawing at the baseboard. Dust flew. Evan crouched beside him, brushing away a thin layer of debris. His knuckles hit metal. He pulled back the carpet corner. Beneath it, a small vent cover was bolted shut. The screws were new. He used his multi-tool to pry it loose. Inside the vent, tucked just beyond reach, was a folded sheet of paper. He coaxed it out carefully. The handwriting was cramped, shaky. It read, "If you found this, the house isn't empty. Don't stay after dark." Evan stared at it until the ink seemed to blur. Behind him, a sound rose from the stairwell, a door slamming somewhere below, the echo thudding through. The bones of the house. Axel spun towards the noise, teeth bared. Evan crossed to the hall, flashlight beam trembling slightly in his hand. He called out again, louder this time. "Who's there?" The only answer was the slow, deliberate creak of the front door opening again. He reached the top of the stairs just as Axel darted past him, racing down. The dog's nails clicked against the floorboards, the sound quick, certain. Evan followed close behind. The foyer was empty. The front door now stood wide open, snow drifting through the gap. No footprints led in. No prints led out. Axel stopped at the threshold, nose working fast. Then he tilted his head back and howled, long, guttural, and fierce. The sound filled the house, rolled through the forest, and faded into silence. Evan stood beside him, breath fogging in the doorway, staring into the dark trees. Somewhere out there, an echo answered. Another howl, far away, faint but real. The wind shifted, pushing the door against his shoulder. It shut again with a soft click, sealing them back inside. Evan exhaled slowly, the paper still crumpled in his fist. He wasn't afraid of ghosts. He was afraid of déjà vu. The storm had quieted by nightfall, leaving the world buried in a heavy white silence. The mansion creaked with the slow settling of old wood and stone. Evan lay on the couch near the living room fireplace, still in his boots, a wool blanket pulled up to his chest. The fire crackled low, painting the walls in amber light. Axel slept near the hearth, his chest rising and falling in the rhythm of a creature finally at ease, or pretending to be. At first Evan thought the sound was part of the dream, the soft tap-tap above the ceiling. Then a pause. Then again. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. His eyes opened fully. He listened. The sound was deliberate, too measured to be the groan of the house. Axel's ears twitched before his eyes even opened. The dog rose in silence, head turning toward the staircase. Evan whispered, "You hear it too, huh?" Axel's tail stiffened. He took one step forward, nails clicking against the floorboards. Then another. The tapping above them stopped. The quiet that followed was worse. Evan reached for the flashlight. Stay close. The beam cut across the living room, catching the pattern of frost on the window panes, the reflection of his own face. Tired, lined, wary. Axel moved first, leading him toward the hallway that connected to the stairwell. But halfway there, the shepherd stopped. His body froze mid-step, nose lifted, sniffing the air. Then suddenly he turned, not toward the stairs, but the wall beside the old piano. A low rumble came from his throat. Evan followed the line of his gaze. The wall was nothing but faded wallpaper and a portrait of a man in uniform, half crooked from age. "What is it, boy?" Axel stepped closer, pressing his nose to the baseboard, sniffing along the seam between the floor and wall. His hackles rose. Then came the sound, the faintest echo, like air moving through a hollow space. Evan knelt beside him and pressed his ear to the wall. Something was inside. He rapped lightly with his knuckles. The sound came back hollow. He did it again, higher this time, and the echo deepened. The dog backed up, tail rigid, and barked once, sharp, urgent, the kind of bark he used on the field when he'd cornered someone alive under the rubble. "Easy, Axel," Evan murmured, but his own pulse had quickened. He grabbed his multi-tool and flicked open the blade, slicing through a strip of peeling wallpaper. Dust puffed out, dry and sour. Underneath there was a faint crack, a seam that didn't belong to any design. He widened it gently, just enough to reveal a thin slit in the plaster. A draught blew through it, cold and damp. Behind him, Axel began to whine softly. His body trembled, not with fear, but with some deep, instinctive alertness. He kept staring at that opening, his ears straining, nose working fast. Evan pressed his flashlight into the gap. The beam vanished into darkness. The light caught for just a second on something metallic. A hinge? A frame? Then nothing. "Hell," he whispered. "You found something, didn't you?" Axel barked again, once, loud enough to make the rafters shake. Then, from upstairs, something answered. It wasn't a bark. It was a single thud, followed by a scraping sound. Evan froze. Axel growled low, moving to stand between him and the stairs. Evan waited, breath shallow, every muscle tight. The sound didn't return, only the creak of branches outside tapping against the window. He turned back to the wall. "Whatever's behind this, we'll deal with it tomorrow." Axel didn't look convinced. That night, Evan slept lightly. The wind whispered through the chimney, and every few minutes the house sighed as if exhaling its secrets. Sometime near dawn, he woke to the sound of Axel pacing. The shepherd moved from the door to the wall, then to the window, and back again, restless. Evan sat up. "You smell it again?" The dog stopped, looked at him, then walked to the same patch of wall. He lowered his head, pressed his nose to the floor, and let out a long, low howl. Not a cry of fear, a warning, a command. Evan stood. The sound of the howl filled the entire house, rolled through the hallways, vibrated the window panes. It wasn't just noise. It was a signal. He felt it in his ribs. "All right," he muttered. "We'll check it." He went to the toolbox near the kitchen door and grabbed a hammer. The plaster cracked with the first hit. Behind it, a layer of wood. 2 more blows, and a small section of the wall gave way. Inside was a narrow cavity, no more than a foot deep, lined with bricks. In the corner, half buried under dust, sat an old metal latch. Axel sniffed, then scratched at it furiously. Evan brushed the debris aside and tugged the latch. It moved slightly, locked from the other side. "Looks like a sealed compartment," he whispered. "Could be a crawl space." The dog's ears flicked forward. Suddenly, a dull knock echoed from inside the wall. Once. Twice. Evan dropped the hammer. His skin went cold. Axel lunged at the opening, barking so hard his body shook. He waited, holding his breath. Nothing followed. The knock didn't repeat. The clock on the mantel struck 6. Morning light began to crawl through the frost-streaked windows. Evan rubbed his hands over his face, exhaustion pulling at him. Whatever this was, it wasn't something he wanted to confront half awake. "Come on," he told Axel quietly. "Let's get some air." Outside, the world was blindingly white. The storm had left the forest silent and clean. Smoke curled from a neighbor's chimney far across the valley, a reminder that he wasn't completely alone out here. He drove into town just after sunrise, stopping at the small general store on Main Street. The bell over the door chimed as he stepped in, shaking off snow. A man in his 60s looked up from the counter, his flannel shirt worn thin at the elbows. "You must be the fellow who bought the Briggs place," the man said. Evan nodded. "Yeah, needed a project." The shopkeeper chuckled without humor. "That house don't need fixing, son. It needs forgetting." Evan raised an eyebrow. "Why's that?" The man leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Because everything rotten in this town started in that house, and some say it never left." Evan studied him for a moment. "You mean ghosts?" "Ghosts, lies, take your pick," the man said. "That place swallowed folks whole. The Briggs family, the sheriff who investigated them, even a kid who used to mow their lawn. None of them ever came back." He paused, eyes narrowing. "Tell me something, Cole. You hear anything strange up there last night?" Evan hesitated, remembering the footsteps, the knock, the hollow wall. He forced a shrug. "Just the wind." The shopkeeper smiled without his eyes. "Sure it was." When Evan returned to the truck, Axel was sitting alert in the passenger seat, watching the tree line across the street. His ears twitched at something unseen. Evan started the engine and looked back at the store in the mirror. The man was still at the window, watching him leave. By the time they reached the mansion again, the daylight had softened into grey. Axel jumped out first, landing with purpose. He trotted straight to the same section of wall inside the living room and sat down, staring at it. Evan ran a hand through his hair. "All right, boy. You win. We're opening it up." As he reached for the hammer, Axel turned his head sharply towards the window. Outside, across the yard, stood a figure watching the house from the trees. Evan stepped closer, squinting through the glass. But by the time he blinked, the figure was gone. The air inside the mansion grew still again, and somewhere deep in the wall, something faintly shifted, like breath trapped in stone. Axel growled, low and steady, and Evan knew then, whatever they had woken inside that house, it had started watching them back. The next morning broke under a thin veil of fog that clung to the trees and wrapped the Briggs estate in grey silence. Evan stood with his coffee mug near the window, staring at the patch of wall Axel wouldn't stop fixating on. The shepherd sat there again, tail thudding once against the floorboards before he rose and pressed his paw against the same spot. Evan sighed. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" Axel's ears flicked, but he didn't move away. His nose went to the floor, sniffing, pouring harder until flakes of old plaster dusted the ground. "All right, partner," Evan said. "Let's see what you're on to." He set the mug down, grabbed the hammer and chisel from his toolbox, and knelt beside the dog. The plaster crumbled easily, too easily, revealing a seam wider than it should have been. Behind it, the hollow sound returned. He chipped away faster, sweat building on his brow despite the cold. Axel's tail swayed once, like he could feel the tension crack open. Then the hammer slipped through. A thin draft of air escaped, carrying the stale scent of dirt and metal. Evan widened the hole until a dark outline appeared. A narrow wooden hatch bolted into the stone foundation. A hidden door. Axel barked once, short and sharp. Evan ran his fingers along the edges. The hinges were nearly rusted through, but the latch had been reinforced with a newer padlock, bright steel against decay. He grabbed the crowbar and forced it under the clasp. It snapped after a few heavy strikes, the sound echoing deep into the wall. When he pulled the hatch open, cold air rose from below, carrying the faint tang of oil and mold. He turned on his flashlight and leaned closer. A wooden staircase descended into darkness. Axel's body tensed. He didn't hesitate. He went down first. "Wait, Axel!" Evan hissed, following fast. The steps groaned under his weight. At the bottom, the air felt different, thick, damp, almost alive. His light swept across what looked like a storage room built into the foundation. But this wasn't some random basement. The walls were smooth concrete, newer than the rest of the mansion, lined with shelves and metal filing cabinets. "Jesus," Evan muttered. "What is this?" Axel padded slowly across the floor, his nails clicking softly. He sniffed at one of the cabinets and barked once, then again, impatient. Evan crouched beside the nearest filing unit. The drawers were labeled with faded tags. Land deeds, loans, water rights. Inside were stacks of folders, yellowed but neatly ordered. He pulled one out and flipped through pages stamped with the Haven Rock County seal. They were property documents, dozens of them. But something was off. The same signatures repeated on each file: Harold C. Briggs. Harold Briggs, Evan whispered. "The mayor who disappeared." Axel barked again. Deeper this time. He was standing by an old coat rack in the corner. Evan approached and saw a jacket hanging there. Military green, its fabric stiff with age. Embroidered above the breast pocket were the letters H.C. Briggs. Evan reached out and brushed the dust from the sleeve. Inside the pocket, he found a small metal lighter with the initials H.B. engraved. He clicked it open. The flint sparked once and died. The air shifted again, faintly stirring the papers on the desk behind him. Evan turned. That's when he saw the wooden crate under the desk, half covered by a canvas tarp. The side of it was carved with a name, C.B. Briggs. Axel sniffed at it, whining softly. Evan knelt and pried open the lid. Inside were stacks of bundled documents, a small compass, a folded map, and a sealed envelope tied with red string. The handwriting on the envelope was uneven, frantic. He opened it carefully. The paper inside was thin, brittle with time. "If anyone finds this," it read, "don't let them reclaim the house. It holds the truth they fear most." Evan stared at the note, his pulse rising. The map beneath it caught his attention, a survey of the entire Haven Rock Valley. Certain parcels were marked in red ink, others crossed out. He traced the lines and realized they matched the properties surrounding an old quarry on the East Ridge. "Land deeds," he murmured. He was moving them, forging them. Axel's head snapped toward the stairs. He growled, low and deep. Evan froze. From above came a faint thump, like something heavy shifting on the floorboards. Then another. Slow, measured. Someone was in the house. Evan killed the flashlight, plunging them into blackness. The only sound was Axel's controlled breathing beside him. He waited, listening. The footsteps stopped directly above the hatch. For a long minute, nothing happened. Then the sound of the latch clicking shut. They were locked in. Axel pressed his shoulder against Evan's leg, steady, grounding him. Evan whispered, "Easy, boy. We'll wait it out." The footsteps retreated. He turned the light back on, keeping it low. On the far wall, something glinted, a small security mirror tilted toward the ceiling. It wasn't there by accident. The angle let someone upstairs watch the basement. Axel snarled quietly. Evan lifted a folder from the floor and flipped it open. Inside were financial ledgers listing transactions between the county and multiple corporations, numbers erased, rewritten, and stamped with false seals. At the bottom, an unfamiliar signature appeared beneath each approval. Sheriff Dalton. His stomach tightened. The sheriff, he muttered. He reached for another folder, marked Private. It contained photographs, black and white prints of a ground survey, men in suits shaking hands beside construction equipment. One of them was clearly Harold Briggs, but the man beside him, half turned from the camera, looked painfully familiar. Evan felt the air leave his chest. It was his father. He sat back, silent, his mind racing. The documents, the map, the hidden room, it all tied back to the same cover-up that had consumed the town 10 years ago. His father had been part of it, or maybe had tried to expose it. Axel nudged the crate again, his nose brushing against the corner. Beneath the papers, Evan found a small tape recorder. He pressed play. The voice that came through was ragged, hurried. "If they find me, they'll bury this too. The quarry isn't what they say. The land hides the water." The tape cut off with a click. Evan's heartbeat pounded in his ears. He looked at Axel, who stared back, eyes bright and unwavering. The shepherd barked once, as if to say, "You know what you have to do." Evan gathered the files into his bag, shoved the note into his pocket, and stood. The air around them had grown colder, heavy with unseen weight. When he reached for the hatch, the handle moved. From the other side, Axel lunged instantly, placing himself between Evan and the door, teeth bared, the growl vibrating through the small space. The handle stilled. A faint shuffle of footsteps retreated towards the front of the house. Evan's pulse slowed. He knelt, whispering into Axel's fur, "Good boy, we're not done yet." He glanced around the dim basement one last time. The truth was buried here, under dust, under lies, under fear. But now it had teeth, and it had just started to howl. The next morning, the wind carried a low hum through the pine trees, the kind that made everything sound like a whisper. Evan loaded the documents and map into a folder, tucking them under his arm before heading into town. Axel followed him to the truck, tail low but alert, glancing back at the house before jumping into the passenger seat. They drove down the long, frost-covered road into Haven Rock. The town looked half asleep. Snow pushed up along the curbs, a few stores opening late, the flag at the county courthouse limp in the cold air. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the heat smelled faintly of burnt coffee. The clerk behind the counter, a thin woman with grey hair and large glasses, greeted him with a cautious smile. "Morning, sir. Can I help you?" "I'm looking for public land records," Evan said, "particularly anything tied to Harold Briggs or properties along the East Quarry." The smile faltered. She reached for her keyboard. "Those archives aren't accessible without written request." "I'm not asking for copies," he said evenly. "Just a confirmation." He slid the old deeds across the counter. "These came from Briggs' personal files. Thought you'd want to see them." Her eyes flickered to the signatures, then quickly away. "Where did you get these?" "Let's just say the house keeps its own records," Evan replied. The woman pushed the papers back toward him. "Mr. Cole, those documents shouldn't exist." He frowned. "Why not?" Before she could answer, a man in a brown sheriff's jacket stepped out from the hallway behind her. His badge gleamed under the lights, and the look he gave Evan was more measuring than polite. "You're the one who bought the Briggs place?" he said. Evan nodded slowly. "That's right." "Then I'd advise you to keep your head down and stay out of county business. That house is nothing but bad luck." "I don't believe in luck," Evan said. "I believe in evidence." The sheriff's smile was small, controlled. Evidence can get twisted in Haven Rock. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the sheriff took a single step closer. You seem like a reasonable man, so let me give you a friendly warning. Leave before you start asking the kind of questions people around here stopped answering a long time ago. Evan felt Axel stiffen beside him, even from outside the door. The dog's faint growl carried through the glass. He gathered the papers, slid them back into the folder, and said quietly, "If you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't be worried about questions." The sheriff's eyes hardened. I'm not the one who should be worried. When Evan walked out, the clerk wouldn't meet his gaze. He felt her watching from the window as he crossed the street. By the time he returned to the truck, Axel was standing on the seat, paws braced against the door, eyes fixed on the courthouse steps. Evan started the engine. "Yeah," he murmured. "I didn't like him either." The drive home was quiet, the sky bruised with an early dusk. Halfway up the hill, the feeling started, a weight in the chest, the sense of being watched. Axel's ears were pinned back. He growled once, low and steady, staring at the tree line along the road. When they reached the mansion, everything looked the same. The porch untouched, the front door closed, but as soon as Evan stepped inside, the hair on his neck rose. The air felt wrong, colder, charged. Axel went straight to the basement hatch. It was open. Evan froze. He was certain he had locked it before leaving. The padlock lay on the floor, snapped clean in half. "Stay close," he whispered. Axel moved ahead, slow and deliberate. They descended together, flashlight cutting through the dark. The room below looked untouched at first glance. The shelves were in place, the crates stacked. But one of the filing drawers had been pulled open, its contents rifled through. Evan's pulse quickened. Whoever had been here knew what to look for. He checked the crate marked C.B. Briggs. Empty. Axel sniffed near the floor, pacing tight circles, tail rigid. Then he stopped, nose pointing toward the far corner where the light didn't reach. He growled deep in his chest. Evan followed his line of sight. A footprint, muddy, fresh, led back to the stairs. He felt the shift in the air again, the faintest echo from somewhere above them. The creak of the hallway floor. They weren't alone. He turned off the flashlight, listening. For several seconds there was only the sound of his own breath. Then footsteps retreating, the front door opening, then closing gently. When he finally emerged from the basement, the door was ajar. The snow outside glowed pale blue under the rising moon. Whoever had broken in was gone, but something glinted on the floor by the threshold. A brass sheriff's pin. Evan picked it up. The initials D.D. were etched on the back. Dalton. He pocketed it and shut the door. The house groaned in the wind, settling into silence again. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Evan sat by the fire, the folder of stolen records on the table beside him. Axel lay nearby, head up, eyes never leaving the window. Around midnight, the dog's ears pricked. He stood stiff, staring toward the back of the house. "Someone out there?" Evan asked softly. Axel's body answered for him. He moved to the door, tail straight, every muscle alert. Evan followed, pushing the curtain aside just enough to peer through. At the edge of the property, near the fence line where the pines began, a shape stood still. Too still to be an animal. A man's silhouette, tall, shoulders squared. Even from a distance, Evan felt the weight of that gaze. Axel started to growl. The sound was low, rolling, a warning that made the glass tremble. Then, suddenly, he lifted his head and howled. The sound tore through the quiet like a siren. It echoed down the valley, bounced off the mountains, and lingered until it became part of the wind itself. Lights flicked on in houses below the hill. Dogs barked in answer. For a brief moment, Haven Rock held its breath. When the echo finally died, the figure at the fence was gone. Evan stepped out onto the porch, cold biting through his flannel. Axel stood beside him, watching the dark woods. The snow was undisturbed. No prints, no shadow. Just silence. The town had warned him to leave, but now he knew. Whatever was buried in Haven Rock wasn't done with him. And Axel, standing like a sentinel in the drifting snow, seemed to know it too. The dog lifted his nose to the wind once more, and somewhere, far off in the woods, another howl answered. The knock came just after sunset, when the last streak of light slipped behind the trees and the mansion turned into a dark outline against the snow. Evan had been sitting at the kitchen table, the map of Haven Rock spread out before him, every red mark circling the quarry drawing his focus tighter. Axel's head suddenly lifted from under the table. His ears pricked, body tense. 3 sharp knocks. Evan rose slowly. Axel moved with him, silent but ready. When Evan opened the door, a woman stood there wrapped in a grey coat, snow melting in her hair. She looked to be in her early 30s, her eyes sharp and clear, the kind that noticed everything before she spoke. "Evan Cole?" she asked. Her voice was steady but carried the fatigue of someone who had driven far. "Yes. I'm Claire Monroe. I called earlier. No answer." He frowned. "Phone line's been dead since the storm." "I figured as much." She glanced past him, her gaze settling on Axel, who had moved to stand between them. "Mind if I come in?" Evan hesitated, then stepped aside. "If you've come to warn me off, get in line." Claire managed a small smile. "I didn't drive 3 hours for that." Axel watched her enter, his body rigid. But instead of barking, he let out a low whine, head tilted, as if trying to place her scent. Evan noticed. "He doesn't usually do that. You've met a shepherd before?" Claire knelt slightly, meeting the dog's eyes. "A few," she said softly. "My father worked K9 units for a time." Axel sniffed her hand, then sat down beside her, guarded, not hostile. Evan filed that away. When they settled in the living room, Claire unbuttoned her coat and pulled a recorder from her bag. "I'm an investigative reporter," she began. 10 years ago, I covered the disappearance of Mayor Harold Briggs. Officially, it was ruled accidental death during a snowstorm. But off-record, there were whispers. Missing funds, falsified deeds, a federal probe that died before it began." Evan nodded slowly. "And you think I stumbled into whatever they buried?" She met his eyes. "I don't think. I know." He studied her face. "You've got something to back that up?" Claire reached into a bag again and pulled out a photograph. Grainy, black and white. It showed Harold Briggs standing beside a younger man in uniform. The badge number was visible. "That's your sheriff, Dalton," she said. "Back then he was deputy chief, and the man behind the camera was my father." Evan blinked. "Your father?" "Yes, Deputy Frank Monroe." Her voice softened. "He was blamed for covering up the land fraud. They said he vanished with Briggs. But he didn't vanish. He was found dead 3 weeks later at the base of Miller's Quarry. No one ever reopened the case." Evan leaned back. The weight of her words pressed down. Axel shifted closer to him, resting his head against Evan's knee, a quiet tether to reality. Claire continued. "I read your name in the auction record when you bought this house. I figured someone would try to dig up what's been buried. But I didn't expect—" She looked around the room. "This." Evan stood and walked to the window. Snow was falling again, heavier this time. "You said your father was found at the quarry." She nodded. He turned, the decision already forming. "Then you need to see what's under this house." They descended into the basement. The air smelled of rust and paper. When Claire saw the filing cabinets and the crates marked Briggs, Her breath caught. She ran her fingers across the embossed tags as if touching ghosts. "This is impossible," she whispered. "They said everything was destroyed." Evan handed her the letter he'd found. "Read it." Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. When she finished, her eyes were glassy. "This handwriting, it's my father's." Evan froze. "What?" She nodded, voice barely audible. "He used to sign his notes the same way. HM, not FM. Harold must have had him write this before he died." Axel circled them, uneasy, the fur along his back lifting. The air felt heavier now, the kind that carried a warning. Evan rubbed his forehead. "That means your father and Briggs weren't enemies. They were trying to expose something. And Dalton made sure no one ever knew." She finished. Silence fell. The truth stood between them like a live wire. If Evan released the files, the town's history would implode, and Claire's family name with it. "You understand what happens if this goes public?" he said quietly. "They'll drag your father's name through the mud again. They'll say he helped steal the land." Claire looked at him, her jaw set. "Maybe the only way to clear his name is to let it all burn." Evan shook his head. "You don't get it. Dalton still runs this town. He's got deputies, influence, fear. You'll be their next target." She stepped closer. "So what are you suggesting, Evan? We bury it again? Pretend this never existed?" He didn't answer right away. Axel's low growl filled the space instead, as if the dog himself rejected silence. "I'm suggesting we find proof strong enough that no one can twist it," Evan finally said. "The files alone aren't enough. We need something that ties Briggs' death, the sheriff, and your father together." Claire studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we start where they ended, at the quarry." Axel barked once, sharp, as if sealing the pact. That night, the storm thickened. Evan checked the locks again and laid the files out across the table. Claire sat opposite him, sorting through documents, eyes tired but determined. At one point, she said softly, "If you release this, it'll destroy the town." He looked up. "Maybe it deserves to be destroyed." Axel stirred by the fireplace, lifting his head at a sound outside. His ears twitched, his body alert. Evan went to the window. The snow was falling in thick sheets, blurring the trees. At the edge of the yard, a set of headlights flashed briefly and went dark. Claire stood beside him. "Someone followed me here." Evan's hand tightened on the curtain. "Then they know we're not done digging." Axel growled, a low rumble that shook the silence. Claire whispered, "What now?" Evan turned to her, his eyes steady, voice low. "Now we find out what your father died protecting." Outside, the lights came back on, 2 beams cutting through the storm. Then a door slammed, and footsteps crunched across the snow. Axel stood at the door, ready. His tail was still, his eyes bright and unblinking. Evan reached for the flashlight and whispered, "Whatever happens next, we don't back down." The knock that came was slow and deliberate, 3 times, the same rhythm as before. Axel answered first. He didn't bark. He just stepped forward, chest out, and released a growl so deep it seemed to shake the bones of the old house. Somewhere between fear and duty, Evan felt the choice tighten around him. To protect the living, or honor the dead. There was no easy path left between the two. The storm hadn't eased by morning. It rolled over the ridge like a tide of grey, swallowing the valley below. Inside the mansion, the lights flickered against the cold. Claire was hunched over the desk in the basement, cataloguing the files they'd found, while Evan marked the map again and again, his pen circling one spot, the quarry east of town. Axel had been restless since dawn. He paced the length of the basement, sniffing the air, pausing now and then to stare at the far wall behind the filing cabinets. Each time he did, his ears twitched, his muscles tightening as if hearing something buried deep. Finally he stopped, pressed his nose to the concrete, and whined. Evan looked up. "What is it, boy?" Axel scratched hard at the base of the wall, claws scraping concrete. His body language was clear. There was something behind it. Claire turned, flashlight beam sweeping across the seam. "Could there be another compartment?" "Only one way to find out," Evan said. They cleared the cabinets aside, revealing a patch of wall slightly darker than the rest. Evan ran his hand over the surface. It was smooth, too smooth for stone this old. He grabbed the crowbar and wedged it into a hairline crack. With a grunt, he pried it open. The plaster gave way in a cloud of dust, revealing wooden boards nailed over a metal door frame. "Someone didn't want this found," Claire said quietly. Axel barked once, sharp, like an order. Evan forced the boards loose and pulled the handle. The hidden door groaned open, releasing a burst of stale, metallic air. The beam of his flashlight fell across rows of ledgers, old bank slips, and sealed envelopes stacked neatly in metal shelves. A table stood in the center, covered with binders and photographs yellowed with time. Claire's breath caught. This is the ledger." They stepped inside. The space was narrow, lit only by the flashlight's cone. Evan picked up one of the ledgers. Inside were transactions in thick, looping handwriting, Briggs' signature scrawled beside deposits and withdrawals. He turned another page, and another name appeared in neat script at the bottom of several checks. D. Dalton. "The sheriff," Evan muttered. He wasn't cleaning up corruption. He was part of it. Claire opened another binder, flipping through a stack of photographs. One showed Harold Briggs shaking hands with Dalton outside a government building. Another captured a group of men in survey gear, smiling for the camera, the caption reading, "Site B, July 1984. She froze. "Evan, look at this." He took the photo. The air left his chest. His father stood at the edge of the frame, holding a clipboard, a marker of the old county geological team. The next few photos showed the same team near the quarry, their expressions shifting from pride to unease as the pictures went on. The last image made Evan's hands tremble. It showed a vehicle, flipped, burned beyond recognition, half buried at the bottom of a pit labeled Site B. The date matched the day his father had been declared missing. "He didn't die in an accident," Claire whispered. "He was buried." Evan set the picture down slowly, every muscle locking into place. The truth hit like ice water. His father had found something during the survey, something Briggs and Dalton couldn't afford to lose. Claire opened another file. Inside were bank records showing transfers from Haven Rock's Public Development Fund to a private account under a shell company. The signatory was H.C. Briggs. The approval stamp carried Dalton's initials. "Jesus," she murmured. They funneled public money through land deeds. The quarry was the cover. Axel's low growl broke the silence. His head jerked toward the stairs, his ears flattened. "What is it?" Evan whispered. Then the lights died. Darkness swallowed the room. The hum of the furnace stopped. Claire gasped. "The power's out." "No," Evan said. "It's been cut." From above came the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, crossing the main floor. The creak of old wood groaned beneath them. Axel bolted toward the stairs, barking with ferocity that filled the entire house. Evan grabbed his flashlight, the beam cutting through the dark just long enough to catch a shadow moving across the hall overhead. "Someone's here," Claire breathed. Evan motioned for her to stay behind him and climbed after Axel. Halfway up, a sharp noise echoed from the front of the house, the door slamming shut. Then the faint sound of glass breaking. Axel reached the top before Evan and turned sharply towards the kitchen, snarling. He lunged forward, teeth bared, and collided with a figure in the dark. The man shouted, stumbling back. Evan rushed forward, swinging the flashlight like a weapon. The beam flashed across the intruder's face for an instant, enough to see the sheriff's badge glint under his coat. Dalton. Stop! Dalton barked, gun drawn. Put it down. Evan froze. Axel didn't. The dog advanced, his growl deepening, pushing Dalton back toward the counter. You shouldn't have gone digging, Cole, Dalton said. His voice was calm, almost pitying. You found things that died with good reason. Evan's voice was low, steady. You killed them. Briggs, Monroe, my father. Dalton sneered. Your old man was collateral. He stuck his nose where it didn't belong. Same as you. Axel lunged, and Dalton fired. The shot cracked through the room, echoing off the stone walls. Evan's heart seized, but Axel had already dodged, the bullet splintering wood instead. The shepherd hit Dalton full force, knocking the gun from his hand. The weapon skidded across the floor. Evan dove for it. Dalton kicked him hard, sending him sprawling. He scrambled toward the front door, but Axel was faster. The dog clamped onto Dalton's sleeve, dragging him down. Axel! Evan shouted. Hold! Axel growled, his teeth still gripping fabric, but not flesh. Dalton froze, panting, sweat shining on his forehead. Evan picked up the gun, chest heaving. You're going to answer for this. Dalton's eyes darted to the basement door. You think anyone's going to believe you? That house down there has been rewritten 100 times. You'll be buried right next to him. Before Evan could respond, Dalton slammed his elbow into Axel's head and broke free. The dog yelped but didn't fall. He turned immediately, snarling again, ready to strike. Dalton ran out the back door into the storm. Evan started after him, but Claire grabbed his arm. No, Evan, he wants you out there. He stopped, chest rising and falling. Outside, snow blurred everything into white haze. The sound of Dalton's truck engine roared to life, tires spinning on ice, then fading into the distance. Axel limped slightly, blood streaking his fur where the bullet had grazed him. Evan knelt beside him, pressing a hand to his shoulder. You're okay, boy. You did good. Claire crouched beside them, voice shaking. He knows we found the ledger. He'll come back. Evan looked toward the open basement door, the shadows below trembling with light from the dying flashlight. Then we take this to someone who can't be bought. Claire's voice steadied. The State Bureau. They'll listen if we bring proof. Axel gave a soft growl of agreement, as if understanding. His amber eyes glinted in the dim light. Fierce, loyal, unyielding. Evan glanced down at the photograph again, the one of his father at Site B. The truth wasn't buried anymore. It was alive, clawing its way out of the dark. Outside, thunder rolled over the valley. The storm had broken, but the fight for Haven Rock had just begun. The storm had quieted to a cold drizzle by dawn, but the tension inside the mansion was far from over. Evan and Claire sat in the basement beside Axel, the glow of the lantern flickering over stacks of evidence, the ledgers, photographs, and the letter written decades ago. The air smelled of damp stone and gasoline from the generator they hadn't dared to start again. Claire pressed her trembling fingers to the old radio she'd found on a shelf. It was a relic from the 80s, covered in dust, but when she turned the knobs, static came alive, hissing through the silence. Evan adjusted the antenna, heart pounding. Try the state frequency, he said. Claire nodded and spoke into the receiver. This is Claire Monroe. We are in Haven Rock, north of the quarry. We have evidence of corruption involving Sheriff Dalton and former Mayor Harold Briggs. We need immediate assistance. Static. Then a voice crackled through. Identify yourself again. Did you say Dalton?" "Yes," she said, her voice steady now. "Sheriff Dalton of Haven Rock County. He's armed and fleeing." The response came quick. "Stay put. State Patrol is en route. ETA 20 minutes. Evan exhaled, the weight of exhaustion pressing on his shoulders. 20 minutes is a long time in this town. Axel's ears pricked, his head turned sharply towards the stairs, nose twitching. He stood silent, then padded to the door and pressed against it. Claire whispered, "What is it?" "Truck," Evan murmured. "Someone's out front." They doused the lantern and crouched low. Through the cracks between the floorboards, faint light swept across the ceiling, the glare of headlights cutting through the mist. Axel growled low but didn't move. Evan held his breath. Then the sound came. A car door opening, heavy boots on gravel, a cough. The radio hissed again, startling them both. "Cole, Monroe, do you copy?" Evan grabbed the mic, whispering, "We hear you. There's movement outside. Stay inside. Officers are approaching from the West Ridge." But before he could answer, Axel barked once, sharp, alert. Evan looked up. The headlights outside dimmed suddenly, leaving only the grey wash of dawn. Minutes later, sirens broke through the mist. Red and blue lights flashed against the frosted windows. They emerged cautiously, the cold biting at their faces. A pair of patrol cars blocked the road, their engines idling. A trooper waved them forward. "State Patrol, you called it in?" Claire nodded. "Dalton attacked us. He's trying to hide the evidence." "Not anymore," the trooper said grimly. "We found him." They followed the trooper down the road, where Dalton's pickup sat half-buried in a ditch. The windshield was shattered, the front bumper torn by rocks. Dalton slumped over the wheel, a streak of blood across his temple, but still breathing. In the back seat lay a metal box, the same one Evan had seen in the hidden room. The Briggs files. The trooper lifted the lid carefully. Inside were envelopes, ledgers, and rolls of film. Evan clenched his fists. He tried to destroy it. "No," Claire said quietly, her gaze fixed on Dalton. "He tried to keep it from someone else." Dalton stirred, groaning. His lips moved before his eyes opened. "You don't understand," he rasped. "Briggs, he's still alive." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Claire blinked. "That's impossible." Dalton coughed, pain twisting his face. "He ran. He's been hiding, out by the border, the old farm, Oak Ridge." His voice faltered, but one sentence clawed its way out. "He made me keep the secret, said if he ever came out, the whole town would burn." Evan stared at him, disbelief and fury colliding. "You let him live while others died for his lies?" Dalton didn't answer. The medics loaded him into an ambulance, but his confession lingered in the cold air. Claire turned to the lead officer. "We need to go there, now." Within the hour, 3 patrol trucks rolled out of Haven Rock, heading north through the forest road that curved toward the state border. The landscape grew emptier the further they went, abandoned barns, fields half frozen, a world forgotten. When they reached the Oak Ridge property, it looked deserted. The farmhouse was sunken and grey, the windows boarded, the barn collapsed under years of neglect. Yet Axel's reaction was immediate. He jumped from the truck and sniffed the air, his movements quick and deliberate. "Easy, boy," Evan said, following close behind. Axel trotted toward the barn, nose to the ground. He stopped at a rusted door, then turned, barking once, then again. Claire's heart hammered. "He's here." They pried the door open. Inside, the smell hit them first, mildew, oil, and something faintly metallic. Dust floated in the thin light from a broken window. Amid the shadows, a figure stirred. An old man sat slumped on a wooden chair, wrapped in layers of blankets. His face was drawn, beard unkempt, eyes dull but wary. When he saw them, His shoulders stiffened. "Harold Briggs?" Claire said softly. He didn't deny it. Instead, he gave a tired smile. "Took you long enough?" Evan stepped closer. "People died because of you." Briggs' gaze drifted to Axel, who stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on him. "That dog," he murmured, almost to himself. "He's got the look of a soldier. I used to have one like him." Evan's voice cut through. "Tell us what happened." Briggs looked between them, the fight draining from his body. "We built Haven Rock on money that wasn't ours. Federal funds meant for veterans' housing. Dalton and I rerouted it through land deeds. Your father found out. We tried to silence him, but when the guilt caught up to me, I ran." He coughed, his breath shallow. "Dalton covered for me all these years, said the truth would destroy the town. Maybe he was right." Claire lifted her recorder. "Say it clearly, for the record." Briggs nodded slowly. "I, Harold C. Briggs, diverted federal funds. Sheriff Dalton helped forge the deeds. We buried those who found out. I ran because I couldn't face what I'd done." His voice cracked. "If there's justice left in this world, let it take me now." Axel stepped forward, laying his head near Briggs' knee, eyes steady, almost forgiving. The old man's hand trembled as he reached out and rested it on the shepherd's head. "You're a good dog," he whispered, "better than any of us were." Minutes later, Briggs slumped back, the life fading quietly from his eyes. Claire stopped the recorder. No one spoke. Outside, the wind carried the sound of sirens drawing near. Evan stood beside Axel, his jaw tight. "He didn't die hiding this time," he said softly. "At least he told the truth." Claire nodded, tears streaking down her face. "And my father's name will finally be cleared." Axel looked up at them both, tail still, gaze solemn, as if understanding the gravity of what had just happened. In the distance, dawn broke over the ridge, light spilling over the old farm and the fields beyond. It wasn't peace yet, but it was the beginning of it. And in that fragile silence, Axel barked once, a deep, steady sound that echoed through the barn like the final punctuation of justice served. 2 months later, the storm had long passed, but its echoes still lingered across Haven Rock. Snow had melted into clear streams that cut through the valley like veins, carrying away the last traces of the winter that had changed everything. The town looked the same on the surface. Small stores, rusted mailboxes, kids riding their bikes down Main Street. But there was something new in the air. People met each other's eyes again. Doors that had been locked for years now stood open. In the front window of the local cafe, the morning paper was pinned beneath a steaming coffee pot. Its headline stretched across the fold, "The House That Kept Its Promise," by Claire Monroe, Herald Tribune. The article ran for 3 full pages. It detailed the truth behind the Haven Rock land scandal, the falsified deeds, and the 2 men who had built a town on stolen soil. It named names: Harold Briggs, Sheriff Dalton, the shadow accounts, the cover-ups. It also told of those who had tried to expose it: Deputy Frank Monroe, Evan's father, and the unknown soldier's dog who refused to stop howling until the truth came out. The photograph beneath the headline showed the old stone house, Evan's house, its roof repaired, the once broken window gleaming with new glass. And at the front steps sat Axel, the shepherd with the scar above his eye, staring straight at the camera. Locals began calling him the Howler of Haven Rock. Evan never corrected them. He was at the house that morning, hammering the last plank into a restored bookshelf. The air smelled of sawdust and rain. The ground floor, once a ruin of dust and secrets, had been transformed into a quiet archive, a place for the town's truth to live. Rows of metal cabinets lined the walls, each labeled with faded tags from decades of evidence now restored and catalogued. Above the main doorway hung a hand-carved sign, "Haven House Archive, Truth Buried Shall Rise." Claire had helped choose the name. She sat at the long oak table in the middle of the room, her laptop open, stacks of files surrounding her. "You sure about this?" she asked, looking up. "Once you hand this over to the state, it's no longer yours." Evan wiped his hands on a rag. "It was never mine to keep." Axel padded over and sat between them, tail gently brushing the floor. His muzzle had grayed a little from the last few months, but his eyes burned with the same quiet vigilance. Every sound outside, the wind, the truck passing on the dirt road, a door closing down the street. He noticed, always guarding. "You know," Claire said, closing the laptop, "they're reopening the Briggs case in full. The Attorney General's office wants your statement." Evan leaned against the workbench. "I've said what I needed to. Briggs gave his last confession himself." Claire smiled faintly. "You know, they're calling your father a hero now." He didn't answer. His gaze drifted to the photograph on the far wall. His father in uniform, standing beside an old shepherd not unlike Axel. Beneath it, a plaque read, "In memory of those who guarded the truth." For a long time, Evan said nothing. Then, quietly, he would have liked this place. Not the noise, but the idea of it. Claire nodded, her eyes soft. "And what about you? What happens now?" "I rebuild. Keep it standing. Someone has to watch over what's left." She chuckled. "You and him both." She reached down, scratching Axel behind the ears. "The Howler of Haven Rock doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but it fits him." Axel gave a low, approving huff. That afternoon, a group of students from the local high school came by. Their teacher had read Claire's article and wanted them to see the archive for themselves. Evan guided them through the rooms, explaining how the files were discovered, how lies could linger if no one looked beneath the surface. The kids listened wide-eyed, some of them scribbling notes. One girl raised her hand. "Mr. Cole, is it true your dog found the hidden room?" Evan smiled slightly. "Not just found it. He refused to leave until I opened it." The girl looked at Axel, who sat proudly at Evan's side. "He's really smart." "He's loyal," Evan said. "That's rarer." After the students left, the house fell silent again. Claire packed her notes into her bag. "The Tribune wants to run a follow-up. Maybe a book deal, too. But I'm thinking—" She hesitated, glancing around the quiet room. "I might stay here a while. There's more to dig through, more stories that need telling." Evan didn't reply right away. He looked through the front window, where dusk was falling over Haven Rock. "You do what you do best," he finally said. "Tell the truth." Claire smiled. "And you?" He glanced down at Axel, who had settled near the doorway, head resting on his paws. "We'll keep watch." Outside, the church bell rang 6 times. The streets grew quiet except for the distant whistle of a train somewhere beyond the ridge. The air smelled of pine and cold earth. That night, as Evan closed the shutters and turned off the lights, Axel remained by the front steps, gazing out toward the dark fields. His ears flicked once, then he tilted his head towards the hills as if hearing something only he could. Then came that sound, the long, low howl that had once echoed through the storm. It rose softly into the night air, no longer desperate or warning, but calm, a song of belonging. People in town paused when they heard it. Some smiled, some bowed their heads, because they knew justice had come to Haven Rock. The ghosts were at peace, and in the heart of it all, one shepherd still stood guard, watching the quiet town he had helped set free. 1 year later, spring had returned to Haven Rock. The valley that once whispered with storms now thrummed with the sound of rebuilding, hammers, laughter, the hum of quiet life. Where there had once been silence, there was purpose. Every weekend visitors arrived from nearby towns, students, veterans, journalists, even families who had once avoided Haven Rock's name. They came to walk through the stone mansion that no longer felt haunted, to see the room where the truth had slept beneath the floorboards, and to meet the shepherd whose howl had awakened it. The sign outside the gate now read, Haven House Foundation. Under it, smaller letters, in honor of those who guard what is right. Evan stood by the porch railing that morning, coffee steaming in his hand. The early mist hung low across the hills, softening everything it touched. Axel sat beside him, chest broad, tail sweeping idly over the steps. His fur had silvered slightly, the mark of a year's peace, but his eyes still carried that sharp glint of vigilance. Cars lined the dirt road. Students filed out with notebooks, led by a young teacher from the community college. Veterans followed, men and women with medals and tired smiles, some holding leashes of their own dogs. Inside, Claire was arranging books on the main table. Her new book, Axel's Howl, had just been released nationwide, and the first copies now rested beside the original files from the Briggs case. The cover showed Axel mid-howl against the backdrop of the stone house, his shadow stretching into the mountains behind him. She caught Evan's eye as he stepped in. "You still haven't read it, have you?" He smirked. "You know I don't need to. I lived it." Claire handed him a signed copy anyway. "It's not just about what happened, Evan. It's about what it meant." He thumbed through the pages. The dedication read, "For those who can't speak for themselves, but never stop being heard." Axel walked between them, brushing against Claire's leg. She knelt to pet him. "You know, they want to feature him at the State Service Dog Convention next month. They're calling him the dog who brought down Haven Rock's walls." Evan chuckled. He'll expect steak dinners for life if he hears that. Claire's eyes softened. He earned it. By late morning, the hall filled with voices. Evan led a small group through the new exhibit, an interactive archive about the town's reconstruction. He pointed to photos of restored properties, to veterans who'd been given back land once stolen by falsified deeds. There was even a new program funded by the state, the Axel Initiative, pairing retired rescue dogs with veterans struggling with trauma or isolation. It had been Evan's idea. When one of the visitors, a grey-haired soldier named Thomas, asked how it began, Evan said quietly, "A good dog once showed me that loyalty doesn't die. It just needs somewhere to go." Thomas nodded, eyes glistening. His own service dog leaned against his leg, a mirror of Axel's calm stance. "Then maybe we'll find that here too." After the tour, local reporters gathered on the porch for a short interview. The camera lights flickered, and Evan stood beneath the wooden sign, Axel sitting loyally at his side. The interviewer, a young woman with an eager smile, asked, "Mr. Cole, people see this house now as a symbol of truth and redemption. What do you think it really represents?" Evan looked down at Axel, then at the valley spread before them. "It's proof that silence doesn't mean surrender," he said. "Some truths don't scream. They wait until a loyal heart howls for them." For a moment no one spoke. The air was still, reverent. Claire, standing behind the cameras, lowered her notepad, eyes shining. She knew that line would make the headline tomorrow. As the visitors departed, Evan walked to the back of the property where the stone wall met the forest edge. There stood a small memorial garden, simple wooden crosses, one for each person the scandal had buried. Frank Monroe, H.C. Briggs, the unknown workers, his own father. Wildflowers grew thick between them. He knelt to place a small plaque beside the last cross. It read, "For those who never stopped guarding the truth." Axel stood silently beside him, nose twitching at the breeze. Then, almost as if on instinct, He lifted his head and let out a low, echoing howl. It rolled across the fields, deep and steady, not one of warning this time, but remembrance. The sound carried far, bouncing off the hills and into the town below. People paused where they stood, the baker in his shop, the children at the schoolyard, the old veterans by the war memorial. They looked toward the ridge, listening. Evan smiled faintly. Guess he wanted the last word. Claire joined him, camera in hand. He deserves it. That night, Haven House glowed softly under the porch lights. The valley was quiet, but alive, a place reborn not through victory, but through honesty. Evan sat on the steps with Axel at his feet. You kept your promise, buddy, he murmured. You brought the truth home. Axel's ears flicked, and his head rested against Evan's knee. His breathing slowed, calm, content. In the distance, an owl called. Then silence again, the kind of silence that didn't feel empty anymore. Inside the house, Claire's book lay open on the table. A line on the final page read, Sometimes the loudest voice in the world is a single howl that refuses to die. And outside, in the heart of Haven Rock, that howl had already become legend. The morning came wrapped in white. Snow covered the hills, the roads, and the roof of Haven House, until everything looked like a memory caught in glass. The air was so still it seemed to hold its breath. Inside the old stone mansion, a faint crackle came from the fireplace. Evan sat at the long oak table, sifting through letters and visitor notes. Some were from students, some from veterans, and a few from families who had come to see the house that once buried the truth. Each one carried the same message: gratitude. Axel lay near the front door, his head resting on his paws. His fur had turned silver around the muzzle, and his movements were slower now, but his eyes still burned bright. When he heard the crunch of tires outside, his ears lifted immediately. Evan looked up. You still don't miss a thing, do you, old boy? Axel wagged his tail once, as if to answer. A van pulled up the driveway, doors sliding open. A group of college students stepped out, bundled in scarves and gloves, cameras slung over their shoulders. The lead student waved as she approached. Mr. Cole, we're from the journalism program at State University. We're filming a short documentary, The Truth Beneath. We were hoping to feature you and Haven House. Evan smiled warmly. You picked a cold day for it. She laughed, her breath clouding in the air. They said the snow makes everything look more poetic. He nodded toward the porch. You'll find plenty of that here. The students set up their equipment, adjusting microphones and tripods. One of them, a tall boy with a camera too big for his hands, crouched down near Axel. The old shepherd lifted his head and blinked, curious but calm. Is that the real Axel from the story? The boy asked quietly. Evan walked over, resting a hand on the dog's back. He's the one. The same Howl that brought this whole town back to life. The boy's eyes widened. He doesn't look like he'd ever hurt anyone. He didn't, Evan said, but he stood between me and danger more times than I can count. The girl leading the crew raised her hand. Can we start filming? Evan nodded. They began rolling. The camera panned slowly across the snowy field before focusing on the porch, on the sign above the door that read, Haven House Foundation. Inside, the fireplace glowed. The sound of soft wind filled the background. The interviewer stepped forward. Mr. Cole, it's been over a year since your discovery changed Haven Rock's history. How does it feel now, living here again? Evan paused for a moment. Peaceful and humbling. Every wall in this house once hid something. Now it keeps memories instead. She gestured to Axel. And him. He's become something of a legend. Evan's eyes softened. He crouched beside the old dog, rubbing gently behind his ears. He didn't bark for food, he howled for the truth. For a moment there was silence. Snowflakes drifted through the open air like ash from a forgotten fire. The cameraman adjusted focus. "Can we get that one more time?" Evan looked into the lens, his voice quiet but steady. He didn't bark for food, he howled for the truth. Axel lifted his head slightly, as if recognizing the words. His ears twitched, and then, without prompting, he tilted his muzzle toward the white sky. The howl started low, a deep rumble from his chest, and grew until it rolled across the valley, long and steady. It wasn't the fierce cry that once echoed through nights of danger, but a sound of memory and strength. The students froze where they stood, awestruck. The sound carried, bouncing between the hills, slipping through the bare trees, and lingering in the cold air long after his voice faded. Claire stepped out from the doorway, a mug in her hands, smiling. "Still guarding, huh?" Evan smiled back. "Always." The students finished their shots, capturing every frame, the man, the dog, the snow, the house that had become both wound and cure. As they packed up, one of them turned. "Mr. Cole, what do you think makes this place so special?" Evan looked out towards the forest where the wind stirred the pines. "Because it reminds people that truth doesn't die just because someone buries it. It waits for the right voice to bring it back. Sometimes that voice doesn't come from a person." The students nodded quietly, understanding more than they could say. When they left, the house grew still again. Evan stood on the porch, watching the van disappear down the road. Snow continued to fall, soft and endless. Axel lay beside him, his breathing slow, his gaze fixed on the forest as if keeping watch over something only he could see. Evan knelt beside him, pressing a hand gently over his chest. "You've done enough, buddy. You can rest now." Axel's tail gave one last slow wag. Then he rested his head on Evan's boot, eyes half closed, but alert. Somewhere far away, the church bell chimed. The camera crew's final shot captured the moment perfectly. The old shepherd on the porch of Haven House, ears high, facing the white horizon as snow fell around him. As the image faded to black, a line appeared across the screen. He didn't bark for food, he howled for the truth. Then another line followed, gentle and open, like the echo of that howl through the valley. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" And as the credits rolled, the faint sound of Axel's voice returned. Soft, eternal, carried on the wind that never stopped moving over Haven Rock. A story ended. A legacy remained. Subscribe to German Shepherd Stories, where loyalty still guards the truth.